No weapon formed against you shall prosper. But be careful who you trust. Not every friendly face wants your progress. Some battles are silent, but very real. Okafor and Ikenna were good neighbors until jealousy and envy crept in. Their shops stood side by side in the heart of the bustling market. For years, they shared more than just proximity. They shared laughter, occasional meals, and the quiet understanding that comes from struggling through the same daily hustle. But something began to change. Ikenna's shop started attracting more customers. At first, it was subtle, an extra buyer here, a slightly longer queue there. Then it became undeniable. People would pass by Okafor's shop without even glancing, only to gather in front of Ikenna's, smiling, bargaining, and leaving with filled bags. Okafor noticed everything. He noticed how early Ikenna opened his shop. He noticed how neatly his goods were arranged. He noticed the friendly way he greeted every customer. But instead of learning from him, something darker took in the roots of his heart: jealousy. It grew quietly at first, whispering voices into his mind. Why him? Why not me? Are my goods not enough? Am I not working hard enough? Soon, those whispers turned into bitterness. Each day, Okafor sat in his shop, watching customers pass by. Meanwhile, Ikenna's laughter rang out like a reminder of everything he lacked. The more he watched, the more his heart hardened. He stopped greeting Ikenna warmly. His smiles became forced. His conversations became shorter. Yet, Ikenna noticed nothing. To him, Okafor was still the same trusted neighbor, the same man he had lived with, the same man he shared jokes with when business was slow. But for Okafor, business was always slow now. One evening, after counting yet another disappointing day's earnings, Okafor sat alone in his shop. The market had begun to empty, and the noise faded into distant murmurs. He stared at a few crumpled notes in his hand and felt something snap inside him. This was no longer frustration, it became desperation. And desperation, when mixed with jealousy, can lead a person down the dangerous path. That night, Okafor made a decision he would later wish he never made. Instead of improving his business or seeking honest solutions, he chose a shortcut, one rooted in darkness and deceit. He convinced himself it was the only way to balance things, the only way to draw customers back to his shop. He told himself he deserved it. Before dawn the next day, while the sky was still wrapped in silence, Okafor left his house quietly. The streets were nearly empty. The air carried a strange stillness. He walked quietly, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from anticipation. By the time the first traders began setting up their stalls, Okafor had already completed something that would change both his life and Ikenna's forever. In front of Ikenna's shop, hidden beneath the earth where no one could easily see, Okafor buried something he believed would shift fortune in his favor. As the sun rose and the market came alive, everything appeared normal. But unseen forces had already been set in motion, and the consequences were just the beginning. The first few days after Okafor buried the charm, it felt like nothing had changed. The market remained noisy, customers moved from store to store, and traders shouted over one another to attract attention. But slowly, so slowly, that only a patient observer could notice, something began to shift. Ikenna noticed it first. Where there had been once a steady stream of buyers, there were now long, uncomfortable gaps. People would walk towards his shop, pause briefly, as if distracted by something unseen, then drift away without buying anything. At first, he brushed it off. Business is like that sometimes, Okafor would say casually, leaning against his counter, with a knowing smile that never quite reached his eyes. Ikenna nodded, trusting him completely, but the pattern continued. Days turned into weeks, and the once busy shop began to feel empty. Goods that used to sell out quickly gathered dust on the shelves. Even regular customers, people who had bought from him for years, stopped coming. It didn't make sense. Ikenna tried everything he knew. He rearranged his shop, reduced prices, even extended his hours. Still, nothing changed. The more effort he put in, the more worse things seemed to get. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Okafor's shop began to see more customers, not a flood, but enough to make a difference, enough for him to notice, enough for him to feel a quiet, dangerous satisfaction. Each time a customer chose his shop over Ikenna's, a smile crept across his face. And each time Ikenna sighed in frustration, Okafor felt a twisted sense of victory. Yet, he kept up the appearances. He would listen as Ikenna complained about his declining sales, nodding, even offering fake encouragement. Don't worry, he would say. Things will get better. Just be patient. But inside, he was anything but sympathetic. He was pleased. Months passed, and the situation grew even worse. Ikenna's savings began to disappear. He struggled to restock his goods. Some days he made so little that he questioned whether opening the shop was even worth it. Then came the pressure from his landlord. At first, it was a gentle reminder about rent. Then it became more frequent, less patient, more serious. The words echoed in Ikenna's mind long after the landlord left. You need to renew your rent soon, or I will have no choice. For the first time, fear settled deeply in his heart. This shop was more than just a business. It was his livelihood, his identity, his hope. Losing it would mean starting over from nothing. And yet, no matter how hard he tried, things kept getting worse. One evening, after closing his shop early due to lack of customers, Ikenna sat alone in the quiet darkness. The market had emptied, leaving behind only silence and quiet debris. He stared at his unsold goods, felt a heavy weight in his chest, confusion, frustration, helplessness. But beneath it all, something else began to rise, a quiet determination. If nothing around him made sense, then perhaps the answer was not in the market, but beyond it. That night, Ikenna did something he had neglected for a long time. He prayed. Not casually, not out of routine, not with urgency, with sincerity, with everything he had left. Day after day, he continued. Even when nothing changed, he persisted. Even when doubts tried to creep in, he held on. And just when it seemed like the situation could get any worse, just when his landlord was preparing to take action, something unexpected began to happen. It started like every other morning, but by the end of that day, everything would change in a way no one in the market would explain, especially Okafor. That morning began like every other, quiet, uncertain, and heavy with expectation. Ikenna opened his shop with the same routine, but something felt different. He couldn't explain it. The air seemed lighter, his heart less burdened. Though nothing around him had physically changed, there was a strange sense of calm within him. When the first customer came, it was unexpected. A woman who had not visited in months walked straight into his shop without hesitation and began buying items in bulk. Before Ikenna could fully process it, another customer arrived, then another. Within an hour, his shop was filled. Voices overlapped. Money exchanged hands quickly. Shelves that had been full for weeks began to empty rapidly. People who had ignored his shop for so long stood eagerly, waiting for their turn. By midday, the impossible happened. Ikenna had sold everything in his shop. He stood there in shock, sweat on his forehead, his hands trembling slightly, not from stress this time, but from disbelief. Customers kept coming, praising the quality of his goods, some even wondering aloud why they hadn't been buying from him recently. Across the narrow paths between their shops, Okafor watched. At first, he thought it was a coincidence, but as the crowd around Ikenna grew larger and his own shop became quiet again, a deep uneasiness settled in his chest. This was not how it was supposed to be. By evening, Ikenna's shop was nearly empty. He had made more in a day than he had made in months combined. He closed his shop that day with gratitude in his heart, whispering prayers of thanks with every step he took home. But Okafor could not rest. Anger replaced his earlier confidence. His thoughts raced. Something had gone wrong. Whatever he had done before was no longer working. Instead of reflecting on his actions, he chose to go even deeper. The very next day, before dawn, Okafor went out again. This time, he was more desperate. He sought out another charm, convincing himself that he simply needed something stronger. He returned to the market earlier than anyone else and buried it once again in front of Ikenna's shop. He waited. Morning came. Traders arrived. The market awakened. But nothing changed. Customers still walked past him. Some barely noticed his shop at all. Meanwhile, Ikenna's shop came alive again, just like the previous day. Okafor's confusion turned into frustration. Days passed, and the second charm had no effect. Then he went back again, more desperate than ever. This time, the seller advised him differently. If he didn't walk in front, then he should place it somewhere more hidden, somewhere closer, somewhere more direct, at the back. That advice felt convincing enough. So once again, before the market stirred, Okafor made his move. Quietly, carefully, he walked to the back of Ikenna's shop and dug the ground. His hands moved faster this time, urgency guiding him. He buried the charm and covered it well, making sure there was no trace. What he did not know was, Ikenna had not only continued praying, but his faith had grown stronger. He had become more consistent, more focused, more intentional. His prayers were no longer about survival, but about protection, clarity, and peace. That day unfolded very differently. From morning to evening, Ikenna's shop overflowed with customers again. Laughter, bargaining, gratitude. It all returned, stronger than before. But for Okafor, not a single customer came. He sat in his shop for hours, watching people pass by him like he didn't exist. Even those who occasionally bought from him before ignored him completely. By afternoon, his confidence had collapsed. By evening, fear began to take its place. Days turned into weeks, and his situation grew worse than it had ever been before. His shop became painfully quiet. His earnings dropped to almost nothing. The very outcome he had wished on Ikenna had now settled on him. He couldn't understand it. Something didn't make sense anymore. He began to question everything. What he had done, where he had gone, who he had trusted. But no matter how hard he thought about it, the answer remained just out of reach. Until one evening, when desperation pushed him to make one final dangerous decision. By the time the sun began to set that evening, the market had already started to thin out. Traders packed their goods, voices faded, and the usual energy of the day slowly dissolved into heavy silence. But Okafor did not leave. No. He sat alone in his shop, staring into nothing, his mind restless and troubled. The same question circled endlessly. Why is this happening to me? What went wrong? His shop, once his source of pride, now felt like a prison of regrets. That darkness crept in. A single thought pushed its way into his front mind. The charm. If everything had gone wrong after he buried it, then maybe removing it would fix everything. Maybe he could undo it. Maybe he could take back control of his life. Desperation does not think clearly. And so, when the market finally emptied and the last footsteps faded away, Okafor stood up slowly. His body felt heavy, but his decision was firm. He stepped out of his shop and walked towards the back of Ikenna's store. That night was quiet. Too quiet. Even the air seemed still, as though holding its breath. Okafor reached the spot where he had buried the charm. His hands trembled slightly as he knelt down and began to dig. The soil was loose, just as he had left it. With each movement, his heartbeats grew louder in his ears. Then his fingers touched it. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. And then, a sudden blinding flash split through the darkness. Okafor cried out as the sharp force surged around him, throwing him backwards. He collapsed on the ground, disoriented, his body shaking. When he tried to open his eyes fully, panic gripped him. He couldn't see. The darkness was no longer around him, it was within him. Fear, unlike anything he had ever known, flooded his heart. He stumbled, calling out, reaching into empty space, but nothing responded. The world he once knew had vanished in an instant. That night changed everything. The next morning, news spread quickly through the markets. Traders whispered in shock as they saw Okafor, once confident, once proud, now moving uncertainly, guided only by instinct and desperation. With quiet difficulty, he found his way to Ikenna's shop. By then, a large crowd had already gathered, drawn by curiosity and disbelief. Okafor stood there, trembling, his voice unsteady as he spoke. Not with pride this time, not with hidden intentions, but with broken honesty. He confessed everything, the jealousy, the buried charms, the deceit. Each word fell heavily into the silence around them. The crowd watched in shock, even shaking their heads in disappointment. Others unable to hide their anger at what he had done. And Ikenna stood there, unable to speak. The man he had trusted, the neighbor he had shared years with, the person he had defended and believed in, was the same person who quietly worked against him. The betrayer cut deep. For a long moment, there was only silence between them. Then, slowly, Ikenna stepped forward, his face carried with pain, but also something else, understanding. Not approval, not acceptance of what he was done, but a choice not to let anger take over his heart. He forgave Okafor, not because it was easy, but because he refused to carry bitterness the way Okafor had carried jealousy. The crowd remained quiet, absorbing the weight of the moment. Later that day, Okafor's wife arrived, her face filled with worry and sorrow. She gently led him out of the market, away from the life he once knew. Their shop was closed, its doors shut as a silent reminder of everything that had happened. From that day on, Okafor's life changed completely. He lived with the consequences of his actions, no longer just struggling, but reflecting. The jealousy that had once consumed him had left him with loss, regret, and a deep understanding of where it had all gone wrong. As for Ikenna, his business continued to grow. Customers returned, his shop flourished, and his faith remained stronger than ever. But he never forgot. Not the hardship, not the betrayal, and not the lesson that sometimes the greatest battles are not seen in the open, but fought quietly in the hearts of men. Not every smile is sincere. Stay silent, stay guarded. The end.